Hey guys, Dr. Brady Salcido here, and I have a question for you. Who doesn't want to be happier? Right? Who's going to say no to feeling more positive and more fulfilled about life?
No, don't like that.
Right? Nobody's going to say no to that, and I'm sure you've probably heard the wisdom out there like find your purpose, find your bliss, express more gratitude, feel more positive, and I think these are great pieces of advice for someone looking to be happier. But I think there always is one piece of the puzzle that's often overlooked anytime I see an article or a blog post about this, and that is our own brain's neurochemistry. Your brain's neurochemistry plays a large role in how we experience the world around us and even our own mood. And so when you look at the brain research involved in happiness, or on the other side of the spectrum, depression, you're typically going to find one major neurotransmitter that's typically repeated over and over and over, and that is serotonin. So to put this into perspective, when you look at the research and you see depression on one side, typically you'll find low levels of serotonin. And when you look at happiness on the other side, you'll typically find high levels of serotonin. Now, please don't misconstrue this. I'm not saying that serotonin is the only thing involved in our happiness. Obviously, that's a much bigger fish to fry, but it brought me to an idea. What if we could set the essential foundation for our brain to be able to build happiness upon by giving it enough of the serotonin it needs, and also inadvertently hack your own happiness? So in this video, I'm going to show you 7 different strategies that you can use to hack your own happiness by increasing your levels of serotonin. Now, first off, serotonin is a very, very important neurotransmitter, which means it's used to communicate from one brain cell to another brain cell. And serotonin is typically involved in the communication of happiness and feeling really good and feeling really fulfilled. And that's one of the primary roles of serotonin, but it actually does much, much more than that. It actually helps regulate your appetite, can even help regulate your weight, even controls things like your memory and even learning. And having low levels of serotonin is basically as close as you can get to a literal buzzkill. It makes you feel more fatigued, makes you feel more unhappy, more depressed, more anxious, and can even affect your learning as well, and actually lower your memory and actually slow your ability to learn, because having low levels of serotonin has actually been shown to crush neuroplasticity as well, which is your brain's ability to change and adapt, so that way you can actually learn new things and learn new habits. Also, serotonin is a precursor or one of the building blocks to melatonin. So if you're not getting enough serotonin, you won't be able to build enough melatonin, which is very, very important for regulating your sleep. So inadvertently, if you're not getting enough serotonin, you're not going to be seeing the best quality sleep as well. Now, because serotonin is a neurotransmitter, many people are under the assumption that serotonin is mostly found in the brain. But actually, surprisingly, only 5% of your serotonin levels are found in the brain. Roughly 90 to 95% of your serotonin levels are actually found in your gut. And your gut inadvertently or indirectly affects your brain via the gut-brain axis. So not only does serotonin influence your brain directly by being produced in the brain, it can also affect your brain indirectly via the gut. So it makes sense why your gut is also called your second brain. Now, just because serotonin is found in the gut doesn't mean that it's actually going to get direct access to the brain. Serotonin actually cannot cross the blood-brain barrier. So what it has to do is it has to be transported across the blood-brain barrier actually through tryptophan or 5-HTP. Now, when you look at the breakdown of how serotonin is created, this makes sense because first you have tryptophan, which is an amino acid, and then it gets converted into 5-HTP and then gets converted into serotonin. And that's how serotonin is created. And this brings me to the first step in our hacks of how you can hack your own levels of serotonin, which is you can either supplement with either tryptophan or 5-HTP, which makes sense because those are the natural precursors to building serotonin. So now I'm going to go through a little bit some of the details of which one is a better fit for you to supplement with, either tryptophan or 5-HTP. Now, when it comes to boosting levels of serotonin in the brain, obviously tryptophan and 5-HTP tend to be the most popular ways or routes to go about in order to do that. But there are some problems with one versus the other. One, tryptophan you can get naturally from your diet. That's one way you can do it. 5-HTP is synthesized in a lab, so that's the only way you can get it is through supplementation. Now, tryptophan has some issues with it in terms of supplementing. One of the first problems with supplementing with tryptophan is that it has to compete with other large amino acids in order to cross the blood-brain barrier. And some of these other large amino acids would be things like leucine, isoleucine, phenylalanine, things like that. They all sit there in the blood-brain barrier, and imagine it's like a bouncer at a club. And the blood-brain barrier would be the bouncer, and all these big, large amino acids would be like people who are trying to get into the club. And the bouncer is basically saying, hey, I only got so many spots open here, so whoever can get in, it's first come, first serve. And so tryptophan has to compete with these other larger amino acids in order to actually get the job done and actually get into the brain. The other major problem with supplementing with tryptophan, and potentially very major problem with supplementing with tryptophan, is that roughly 90% of tryptophan that enters the body doesn't even enter the pathway to get turned into serotonin. Actually, 90% of tryptophan actually gets turned into a completely different pathway called the kynurenine pathway. And the kynurenine pathway has some potentially very harmful byproducts like quinolinic acid, which is a very potent neurotoxin. So if you're supplementing with more tryptophan, chances are you're actually going to be ending up with more quinolinic acid and other potentially harmful byproducts through that process, which may be something that could be a big sticking point in terms of supplementing with tryptophan. Now, the last concern that I have with supplementing with tryptophan is it really strongly involves your gut, and there's also an additional step to the process. So instead of going from just 5-HTP to serotonin, you now have to go from tryptophan to 5-HTP to serotonin. And oftentimes the gut plays a large role in this, and if you have an unhealthy gut system, oftentimes that can affect how tryptophan gets broken down in the gut, which inadvertently means that you may be getting less tryptophan entering the serotonin pathway, and you may be getting more entering the kynurenine pathway, which, as we talked about before, leads to some potentially harmful byproducts that you don't want. So all in all, my vote is if you're going to be supplementing to boost your levels of serotonin in the brain, my first tip is to supplement with 5-HTP. It's not going to be as adaptable as tryptophan is, and tryptophan is an amino acid that gets used in various processes in the body. But 5-HTP is very, very specific towards trying to boost serotonin levels in the brain. So obviously, if that's our goal, your main objective is then going to be supplementing with 5-HTP. Now, my second strategy on how to boost your levels of serotonin in the brain is actually through carbohydrates. Now, as we kind of mentioned before, tryptophan has a hard time crossing the blood-brain barrier because it has to compete with all these other large amino acids. Well, interestingly enough, one of the best ways to reduce its competition on getting through the blood-brain barrier is actually through carbohydrates. Because what happens is carbohydrates raise your blood sugar levels, which then will inadvertently stimulate the release of insulin. And insulin comes into play, and insulin will actually take away a lot of these large amino acids that are competing with tryptophan across the blood-brain barrier, and will give tryptophan an easier time getting across so that it can get into the brain. And studies show that carbohydrates actually help boost levels of serotonin in the brain. And this is why when you have a carbohydrate-rich meal, like let's say some pizza or some bread, you feel really, really good afterwards because it's boosting your levels of serotonin in the brain. And my third tip for you is sunlight. Get some of that vitamin D, go outside, walk outside a little bit. Sunlight is actually a direct trigger of serotonin synthesis. And there's actually some interesting studies that are coming out, and we're not sure of the exact pathway quite yet, but we're starting to see a lot of research that shows that there may actually be serotonin receptors in our skin that respond to direct sunlight. And the research shows the more direct sunlight you get, the stronger the serotonin production. And this may also help explain why seasonal affective disorder exists and why people seem to be in such a bad mood during the winter months, because the sunlight goes away and therefore serotonin levels may be going down. And this is also how when you get sunshine, it also produces more vitamin D, which also helps improve your cognitive performance, cognitive function as well. So there's just two reasons why you should go out, get some sunlight, get some sunshine, and just start feeling happier. Step number 4 is get a massage or get some sort of body work done. Use a foam roller, use massage tools, whatever you have at your disposal. And the research shows that massage can actually boost your serotonin production by as much as 28%, which is pretty fascinating. So one of the strategies that I've been using that may be helpful for you is about an hour before bed, I bring out my foam roller and I start rolling out about an hour before bed. And the goal is to increase my serotonin production so that way it can be in ample amounts to produce enough melatonin so I can get deeper, more rejuvenating, and more restorative sleep. And it's been working wonders for me. And hack number 5 is exercise. And we can't even go into enough detail on how valuable and important exercise is for your brain health, your brain performance, and just overall experiences of happiness. But in terms of the research that's out there, 2 of the most prominent areas of research that have been done have really been shown that high intensity exercise and aerobic training are 2 of the most valuable forms of exercise for your brain. They help produce more BDNF, but also they have been shown to actually produce more serotonin as well. Now, another interesting area of research that I kind of stumbled upon was actually showing how intense bouts of exercise, where you're really pushing your exercise to fatigue, where you just finished the workout and you're completely spent, actually has been shown to increase your levels of serotonin substantially. And this is why at the end of a really hard and invigorating workout, you feel really proud and kind of feel really good about yourself. Because at the end of that workout, your brain just all of a sudden gets flooded with blood, also gets flooded with serotonin and dopamine, which is your reward neurotransmitter. So this is just all the more reason to push hard in those workouts and give it your all, because in the end, your brain's going to thank you for it. Now, hack number 6 is St. John's Wort. Now, St. John's Wort acts in a very interesting manner, and it's a very popular supplement in terms of boosting levels of serotonin in the brain. And it works in a very interesting manner because what it does is, if you recall our talk on tryptophan, roughly 90% of tryptophan doesn't actually enter the pathway to turn into serotonin. It actually enters the kynurenine pathway. What St. John's Wort does is it enters the pathway and it basically blocks a certain enzyme that takes tryptophan into the kynurenine pathway. And what that means is that'll help more tryptophan to enter the serotonin pathway to turn into serotonin eventually. So basically it helps more tryptophan get converted into serotonin and prevents it from entering the kynurenine pathway. And the research shows that it actually helps boost serotonin in the brain. And the last hack that I have for you is omega-3s, and 2 particular omega-3s we're going to focus on for this one, which is DHA and EPA. Now, we know how valuable omega-3s are for building a healthy brain. Your brain is 60% fat, and it needs omega-3s, particularly DHA, to create a really strong and healthy brain cell. So very, very important in that aspect. But also DHA and EPA in particular are very important for serotonin. DHA has actually been shown to increase the sensitivity of your receptors to serotonin, which actually can help you boost your mood. And it's actually like saying you're getting more with less, because you're making those receptors more receptive to serotonin. EPA, on the other hand, has actually been shown to improve or increase production of serotonin in the brain. Hey, thank you so much for stopping by and checking out this video on the 7 hacks to hack your own happiness. And hopefully you enjoyed it. And if you're looking for more videos on creating a high-performance brain and mind, then make sure you click to subscribe to this channel by pressing that button right here. I promise you won't regret it. It's awesome. More stuff's coming.